All right. Hey, everybody. Thanks for coming today to the latest of the Target Test Prep webinars with GMAT Club. We're super pumped today because we have a nice special panel here to talk about the Ultimate Study Plan 2023. So I can start out just with a brief introduction. I'm Jeff Miller, the head of instruction at Target Test Prep and the COO. And, I've been with Target Test Prep for about 15 years. So I certainly have seen a lot as it comes to GMAT students, Target Test Prep students, what it takes to successfully study and successfully take the GMAT. So there's a lot that I'll be sharing with you today. And Marty, I think you can introduce yourself next.
Hi, I'm Marty Murray. I'm head of curriculum at Target Test Prep. You've probably seen me around on GMAT Club and everywhere else. I help to create the courses, and I've been tutoring and teaching the GMAT for a long time and definitely seen what works and what does not work for GMAT students. So I'm excited to be able to share some of that with you today. On to Ben.
Yeah, Ben Resnick. I've been tutoring, teaching, creating curriculum since 2016, taken the test 5 times, love to put myself in the student's shoes and, really, put the pressure on and take the test. I'm excited for the Focus Edition coming out, get to do that again. And we actually excited to be launching the Focus Edition course. I teach the group course for TTP now, and a week and a half we're starting that Focus Edition one. So really rewarding to help everyone make the breakthroughs in their scores.
And hi, everyone. I'm Kaylee Erickson. I've been teaching for over 20 years, been teaching the GMAT for I guess about 12 years now, have helped thousands of students beat the GMAT. So really excited to talk to you about what makes a successful study plan, because I've seen all the successes and also all of the, roadblocks that students come against. So excited to talk to you about that. My background is in educational neuroscience, so I like to nerd out about learning and how people learn. So if you have any questions about that, please let me know.
Yeah, and to that point, if you guys have questions throughout the presentation, just ask. This doesn't have to be super formal. We want to answer your questions, when you have them, when they're relevant. So we'll be keeping an eye on the comments to answer those. All right, so to start us off, Kaylee, if you want to talk about the pre-GMAT work that students should do prior to jumping into their studying.
Absolutely. Yeah. So one of the biggest mistakes that I see students make is saying, okay, let me just focus on the GMAT first. Let me get the GMAT score I need, and then I'll deal with all of the other aspects of my application. That can be a viable strategy if you're not planning to apply for a couple of years. But if you're looking to apply within the next 12 months, especially those of you who are looking to hit round 1 or round 2 applications this fall, you really can't save your application work until after the GMAT. A few key reasons for that. One, GMAT prep will probably take you longer than you think. I think everyone on this panel can agree. For most students, it takes longer than they think, not less time than they think. And a lot of the other aspects of your application might also take longer than you think. Putting together really thoughtful essays, developing a really good plan about what schools you should apply to, reaching out to your recommenders. Sometimes it takes some pinging and some reminding for them to write those recommendations. And, it's generally true that, you can get a perfect score on the GMAT, but still not get into your target schools if your application is messy, shoddy, not very thoughtful. Whereas if you have a really thoughtful application, a really compelling case for yourself, then maybe, you don't have to get as high a GMAT score as you think. So start thinking about both of those things at the same time. There are a lot of great free resources out there. A lot of different companies do admissions consulting and offer free sessions. Take advantage of anything that you can that's free, but plan out your whole calendar, including that application work, while you're studying for the GMAT. Please do not save it until the end of your process.
Yeah, I mean, these are really great points. We talk to students about this stuff a lot. I mean, I think the summary of everything Kaylee said is start early, right? And be thoughtful with the process, because I mean, just talk to GMAT students and MBA students and see what they've had to do, because I think we just feel like, oh, well, I just got to study a few months for the GMAT, another month for my applications. And yeah, for some, they can get it done in short order, but for others, there's, multiple steps that have to be taken. There's retakes, there's roadblocks with their application. So just take how much time you need and then add more time to it. So if you think it's going to be a 6-month process, give yourself enough time for 9 or 10 months. And then that way, you're in a great spot. And of course, something we talk about a lot too is start early. A lot of people say, well, can I take the GMAT now, save it, and use it down the road? And the answer is absolutely, as long as you apply using your GMAT score within the 5-year window where it's valid. So those are just some considerations. I don't know if anyone else has any other thoughts on things to think about.
Sounds pretty good, Jeff.
All right, great. So that's the pre-GMAT work. Now, whether or not to take the GMAT or GMAT Focus, Marty, I know you have some thoughts on this.
Yeah, so a big thing that's coming up, and someone was just asking about the focus edition in the comments, is which one should I take? And there are a few considerations. One is, obviously, we all know the GMAT Focus Edition includes fewer topics. So if you want to study fewer topics, maybe you should take the Focus Edition, especially if you don't feel as if you're strong in sentence correction. Geometry, people have mixed feelings about that. And, so there's a key consideration. Something people don't know that much about is the data. There's going to be a lot less data sufficiency, and the data sufficiency is not going to be quite the same as it is on the current GMAT. A lot of the pure math data sufficiency questions we see where x, y equals an integer or something are not going to be on the new GMAT. So if you're studying for data sufficiency, you definitely want to transition to some materials, or at least be cognizant of the fact that you won't need to know as much for data sufficiency as you currently do. The same techniques are going to apply, but this is something you want to be aware of. So anyway, okay, so yeah, there are fewer topics. But here's the thing. This thing is a new test. So people don't really know how it's going to go at first. If you've looked up the percentiles for the GMAT Focus, the GMAT is expecting different percentiles for the Focus Edition. So you might be surprised by the score you're going to get, and schools don't know really what the score is going to look like. So some schools are saying they will not accept the Focus Edition during this application cycle. Okay, so HBS is one, Wharton's another, and maybe others are going to feel the same way. And the third point here is, as I was saying, your scores, what they are going to mean, won't be clear initially. They're not going to know what's a good GMAT Focus score until we have a month or two of people taking the test. So if you're planning on applying in round 1, round 2, almost definitely you should choose the current GMAT. Maybe in the later rounds, the Focus Edition will make sense, but you definitely don't just jump into thinking you can use the Focus Edition to apply this year. Now, someone was asking, what about target test prep as regards to the Focus Edition? We are going to be rolling out a Focus Edition focused course in about a week. So get psyched for that. Every target test prep user will be able to switch to that course and choose either the Focus Edition or current edition GMAT course for target test prep. So we definitely have you covered if you're thinking of taking the Focus Edition.
Yep, go ahead, Kaylee.
Oh, sorry to jump in. One thing I wanted to add is that GMAT has not yet released the exact date that the Focus is going to be available. Right now on their website, it just says Q4, and it's not entirely clear what Q4 means. One of the big takeaways from this session should be have a clear plan, build out your calendar, know what you're going to be doing and when. So if you're applying this year, because there isn't a clear date for when you'll be able to sign up for Focus, I would just recommend not planning to do Focus if you're applying round 1 or round 2 this year, because it'll be much harder to build a clear calendar.
Yeah.
Or
a score goal.
Yeah, and one thing I'm telling people too is you can always pivot to the GMAT Focus later on. It's not as if, yes, there are slight changes. There's some things you won't need to know. Sure, you may have studied sentence correction, but at the end of the day, the knowledge you're gaining for the current GMAT will more or less carry over to the Focus. So I don't think it's the end of the world if you're, you do the regular GMAT and then pivot at some point if necessary. I think you'll be fine. It's not going to be a huge lift to make that pivot. All right, great. Well, we can keep moving here. So developing your plan. Now, Ben, do you have some thoughts on developing your GMAT plan?
Yeah, so you want to first get familiar with the format and questions, and so you have a sense of what you're dealing with, what the question types are. And a lot of people say to take an official practice test right away, and I do recommend that. But probably, you do want to get that first 10 to 20 hours so that it's not like you're not sandbagging your score too much by just not even knowing what the question types are. So yeah, first get that sense of the question types. Then sometimes people do, feel like a little nervousness around that, taking that practice test. Don't put too much pressure on it, right? This is just your starting score. And we've seen people go, 200 points, 300 points, 400, 500 even. So it's amazing what you can do with like a disciplined, strong plan and a strong structure. So, definitely don't worry too much if that score is not what you want it to be starting off, but just go there, look at it as a diagnostic, see where you're at, strengths and weaknesses, get a feel for it. And, it gives you a sense of what kind of resources you'll need, how far you need to go. But yeah, just, think of it as a diagnostic and try and have fun with it. And it is, having that baseline, it's so rewarding to see as your score goes up, right? So say you started at a 450 and then your next practice test, you're at 620 and then, your goal is a 700. And then you see, oh, well, I got up, the first 170, I only got 80 left. And then you go crank that out. And I love how Marty always talks about, there's this myth that there's a score plateau, and there really isn't. It's you can always push through. There's always something that you can continue to improve, and having that growth mindset about it, and having that quantified reward of seeing starting and finishing and seeing that progress. There may be ups and downs along the way, but really helpful to have that quantified metric starting off.
I just want to jump in and add, there was a question in the comment, someone saying that they'd been studying for 2 months. When should they take that first practice test? Don't wait to take it, exactly as Ben was saying. Jump in and take it just to get a feel for it, because if you haven't taken a timed practice test yet, the timing is probably more uncomfortable than you think. And that can really inform your study process, knowing what it feels like to take it under time conditions and practice guessing and moving on. That's something that you don't get to practice if you're not doing practice tests.
Yeah, that's a great point too. And I think people are generally scared when they're first starting out to do it. So to your point, Kaylee, yeah, waiting isn't going to help, because if you never take it, and I've talked to students who haven't, and then they're at a point and it's like, well, they don't know how much they've improved, right? So it's a tracker for what things are happening, how things are happening from beginning to end. So you can look back and say, yes, I actually have improved. I mean, if your first practice test is 3 months into your prep, then you're going to be in a place where you get a 650. Well, where were you starting? 450?
You won't even know. You won't even know if you improved. Is your prep working? And that's such a key thing here.
Exactly. So yes, these are all really, really good points. It'll give you an estimated timeline. There's a lot of really good stuff to think about. So yeah, any other thoughts on this, everybody?
I guess there's one question just popped up in the chat, and we're going to be addressing this later, kind of how much time do you need? And it's always hard to give an answer to that. If on your first practice test you get a 500, but you're targeting a 700, how much time? The answer is it'll vary for everyone. But because it's not very helpful to say it varies, here is my very broad rule of thumb. Give yourself at least a week for every 10 points you want to gain. It's unrealistic to do less than that in that amount of time. So, if you want to gain 100 points, give yourself at least 10 weeks, probably double that. That is the bare minimum. It can take more than that. It certainly isn't linear. But that's the broad rule of thumb that I give. Guys, let me ask you, do you have a rule of thumb, or do you always just say it varies?
I usually say it varies. Yeah, I mean, there's so many considerations, and it's always a unique path for every student. So I wish it wasn't, right? Because students ask it a lot, and they do want a sense of a full timeline. But to me, it generally varies. I don't know what Marty and Ben think.
Well,
Yeah, it varies a lot. It depends on what you need to accomplish. You know, I've seen someone go score like section score go up 10 points in quantum verbal in a very quick amount of time because maybe the person already had most of the skills but was making a lot of careless errors or something. In that case, your score is going to go up pretty fast. If you really need to learn a lot of topics, then it's going to take longer to make the same increase. You know, so it really depends on a few different factors.
Right.
yeah, and it can be like there definitely isn't a plateau, but there can be some like low hanging fruit that is easier to get. So say you start at 500, the road 500 to 600 might be faster when you as you get your fundamentals than the 700 to the 750 or those 50 points might be harder than the 500 to 550. So that's another thing to keep in mind is like to get you're moving up like a ton of percentiles. Like say your 700 is an 88 percentile and you want to get 750, that's top 2 percentile. So you're like 6 times in a way as as hard to get that score.
To sum it up.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I
Yeah.
agree. And this even goes back to what Kaylee said too. Know what's going on with your schools, your applications. Don't just say like, hey, I'm going to take the GMAT to do the best I can and then figure it out. Then, I mean, there's a myriad of issues with that, from motivation to really using your time wisely. Because let's say you stand pat at a 650 and then in 2 years you're like, wait, I really need a 720. So yeah, just have your ducks in a row. Take the practice test. Doesn't matter how you do. It's just a baseline, and then you move forward. All right. So I know we've about 40 minutes, so we're pretty good. Now, well, actually, hey, I just talked about this. So setting a score goal. I'll expand a little bit. You do want to do your research. Even if you're a senior in college and you're like, I'm not going to apply for 3 to 4 years, still have an idea. Do you want to apply to M7? Do you want to apply to top 15? Do you envision yourself doing part-time programs? Think about that, because that's going to have an effect on how much time and effort you need to spend on this GMAT. And again, the last thing you want to do is put in 4 to 5 months of hardcore preparation. Let's say during your senior year of college, for example, where you're giving up other things that you'd potentially rather be doing, and then realize down the line, oh boy, I have to retake it. Because then that's just almost wasted time. You don't want to put yourself in that position. And just make sure if you take it early that you're going to use it in 5 years. You don't want to be sitting with an expired GMAT score. And as we said, your baseline is important. That's going to tell you what the estimated timeline looks like. If you don't have it or you're scared to take it, then you're not going to be able to see the clearing through the trees. So again, do it. Week of prep, take the practice test. Does anyone have any other thoughts on setting a score goal?
The other thing that I would say is I've seen a lot of students say like, well, my undergrad GPA wasn't that great, or my resume is not that impressive, so I need to get the 780 to impress schools. And it's not the case that the GMAT needs to do all of that work for you. It is one data point among many. So don't put so much pressure on yourself. Do as well as you possibly can for the schools that you want to get into. But first of all, be realistic about what schools seem right for you. And then you can also supplement the GMAT with other things, other aspects of your application that you can shine a light on. So don't think that if you're targeting top schools, that means that you need scores well above the average, but you should aim for the average at your target schools or above.
Yep. Agreed. Marty or Ben, any other thoughts?
I think I'm good on this one.
Okay. Just one last thing to what Kaylee was saying. If you're unsure about some of these schools, or based on your profile, based on your GPA, reach out to people, reach out to admissions, reach out to alumni, or if you can reach out to alumni from your undergrad who maybe have MBAs at some of these schools, because that's a nice connection, do it. So really expand, your sphere or scope of people and talk to them, because people are generally pretty happy to talk about the schools that they went to where they got their MBAs. So you can really learn a lot of information for people who went there and are living it. All right, 2 phases of GMAT prep. Marty, you want to talk a little bit about these 2 phases?
Yeah, sure. So once we've taken that first practice test, it doesn't make that much sense to keep taking practice tests. I mean, if you want to jump into a practice test or maybe a third-party test once in a while through your prep, could make sense for some people. But generally what we want to do is break this into 2 phases. In the first phase, you're going to be learning your topics. You're going to be going through your practice questions. You're going to be learning the concepts, the strategies, the question types, really getting this stuff down. And the reason why we do it this way is because taking a practice test when you're, a third of the way through material, it's really just going to tell you you're a third of the way through the material. If you haven't studied overlapping sets, you're going to see an overlapping sets question. And what is the practice test going to tell you? You haven't studied overlapping sets questions yet. So it's great to focus on learning, getting the topics down, getting the question types down first. Then later on, we can move on to the practice test phase. And at that point, people are asking about that. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. But at that point, you can focus on taking your practice test, reviewing, and things like that. So those are our 2 phases. And we're going to move on to showing you what you should do in each of those phases.
Yep. So let's move on to that now. One of my favorite things I like to talk about, I'm pretty sure between talking to students and responding on forums that I pretty much talk about this at least once a day, and it's the topic by topic approach to your preparation. So some of the mistakes that people will make is they say, all right, I'm studying for the GMAT. Because you've probably done this with other standardized tests in the past. Just grab a book, just blast through random questions, right?
Yeah.
That might seem logical because, hey, if I do 2,000, right. So there you go. And if you do 2,000 questions and you look at solutions, why wouldn't you get those down, right? But the problem is if you're jumping from geometry to ratios to rates to whatever all in one session, like you're not gonna get a feel for that question type. Because the thing is, there's really not a lot of opportunities to succeed on either quant or verbal on the GMAT. There's just not a lot of questions. But there's a ton of ways questions can be asked. So it's not just about, hey, am I good at quadratic equations or am I good at work problems? It's about within those topics, how am I? And because you don't know where you're going to be, what's going to get thrown at you from them, right? So when you're learning, you want to learn each topic in this kind of linear fashion. And by doing it, you can just basically check them off the list. Like, okay, I got through quadratics. Do I know quadratic identities? Do I know difference of squares? Do I know factor by grouping, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? And you practice just one topic at a time. You'll eventually do mixed practice, but when you're first learning it, you want to practice one topic at a time. And the thing you don't want to do is just do all of the conceptual mastery and then practice. That's a mistake I see people making, especially some people in TTP, where they're like, well, I did all the chapters. Now I'm going to go back and do the chapter tests. Problem with that is, I'm sure it's weeks or months since you did the first chapter and you didn't actually drill down the stuff you learned. So if you don't actually practice what you've read and learned, it's very easy to convince yourself that you have it down. You go back to practice it, you fall on your face and you realize, oh man, I really should have actually done the practice in real time. And initially when practicing, you do it untimed. And this is a favorite thing to discuss that Marty talks about a lot. So I'll actually let you jump in there and talk about the untimed practice, because I know you talk about that a lot.
Sure. Yeah, I do talk about that a lot. So one of the key things you want to do as far as your GMAT prep plan is definitely include untimed practice. And I know people would tell you different, or maybe if you're taking a class or something, someone will set a stopwatch and say, okay, let's all answer questions in 2 minutes each. But here's the deal. Playing the GMAT is basically involves learning to play a game. That's what you're doing when you're preparing. So that's part of the reason why, as Jeff said, you should do the topics one at a time and do the questions right after you learn the material, because you're learning to play a game. This isn't a math test or a verbal test or a data insights test. It's basically a test of playing a game. It's a test of execution, right? So, okay, after you learn graphics interpretation, you're going to hit graphics interpretation questions. And the way to do them is start off doing them on time. Take all the time you need. Let's face it, what game would you play at full speed the first time you played it? Or what other activity would you do to full speed? If you learn to play the guitar, you're not going to play the guitar at full speed the first time you're learning a song. You're going to pick your way through it, learn the notes. The same thing goes for the GMAT. You want to start off on time and learn to get the questions correct, because that's what this is a test of. It's a game of getting to correct answers. So we learn the concept, and then we learn how to use that concept to get correct answers. And if it takes you 10 minutes for a question, take 10 minutes. Do whatever it takes to learn to get correct answers. That's what you want to do. Then once you know how to get correct answers, you can figure out how to get faster. So that's going to be your process. Learn the concepts and strategies, practice the topic on time, learn to play that game, and then work on speeding up your game. And that's the way you're going to totally rock this test.
Awesome. Ben or Kaylee, have any thoughts? Yeah, Kaylee, jump in.
One caveat, agree with everything said so far, but when talking about master one topic at a time, for most of you, you should alternate quant and verbal. I've seen people try to do all the quant first and then all the verbal. That is a mistake. So unless you know that you're great in one topic, but not as good in the other, and you mostly need to work on one, for most of you, you're wanting to maximize both quant and verbal. Do one quant topic one day, one verbal topic the next.
Yeah, absolutely. And one other thing I want to add is people ask, well, how do I get motivated to do this? And if you look at the GMAT material as kind of a syllabus you have to get through and just put your head down, it's not as much fun as if you look at each topic as an opportunity to win, right? So let's say you're on overlapping sets. Okay, you learn overlapping sets, you go through the questions, and then you get to the point where you can answer them at test pace. You just achieved a win. And getting to your GMAT score goal, you can look at it as a series of wins. Each topic you learn is a win. And that way, you're just winning every week a little bit. You're feeling good. You see your score going up. You know it's going higher because you know more. And that way, you'll stay motivated throughout your prep.
Yeah, I love that tip from Marty. And one thing that he said helped me a while ago is to go for streaks. Like that's another way to make it a game and make it fun is you're doing, try to hit 5 in a row, 10 in a row, 20 in a row, depending on where you're at. But that's another one fun way. Make it gamified, make it wins. And that's definitely like celebrate your successes as you go. Definitely like the motivation factor and the mindset of this, can be a lot of hours. So the more you can get your mindset into like, not just the game side, and then also like, what am I learning here? That's a real life skill. Because it can feel like a grind. But if you realize like, hey, percents is like this is like, going to help me in my meetings. This sentence correction helps me, think clearly, and the critical reasoning, I'm going to be able to analyze arguments a lot better. And, I do get feedback from clients like, wow, like it kind of felt like, I really realized that this helped me afterwards and applied to my life. So if you can apply it to your real life, and just as you're going out shopping and stuff too, in the grocery store, discounts and use it in real life, it's really helpful too.
Yep. Totally agree with that. All right. Mastering quant and verbal before IRDI. Does anyone take a stab at this?
I'll jump in. So, a lot of people want to know what order to do. As Kaylee was saying, it's good to do quant and verbal, alternate them. But we don't necessarily want to alternate in data insights or integrated reasoning in the beginning because integrated reasoning questions, the data insights questions are based on quant and verbal. They're all full of percentages and inferences and weighted averages and all that stuff. So if you learn quant and verbal before you hit integrated reasoning or data insights, you're going to be prepared for it. So these two are basically prerequisites for data insights. The only exception might be data sufficiency. Data sufficiency is closely related to quant. In fact, you'll see data sufficiency questions for many of the quant topics that, they basically work off the quant topics to just a way of asking asking about the topic in a different way. So it's better to work on data sufficiency alongside quant, but definitely you want to do quant and verbal before IR.
And just to add to that, one important reason if you're taking the current version of the test, quant and verbal are the only two factors in your 200 to 800 score. Integrated reasoning is scored separately, and it just matters less. High 200 to 800 score and low IR is not going to bar you from getting into your target school. In the GMAT Focus Edition is where data insights will come in. And as we were saying earlier, we kind of just don't know how those scores and those percentiles are going to shake out and how schools will interpret them. So again, that's a reason to save it for later in your process.
Yep. Totally agree. And you'll notice with the GMAT focus, some of the data sufficiency will be changed a bit. Like there's going to be less, as Marty was saying earlier, pure math. So it'll be more kind of word problem based data sufficiency. But nonetheless, when you're learning it, there's no sense in learning it separate. It's going to be based on quant principles. And it's going to be based on the stuff that you're learning, and doing with problem solving questions. So as you've probably learned it for the current GMAT, the way data efficiency has been presented, do the same thing for the GMAT focus. I wouldn't change it. And yeah, DIIR, same deal. Save it for the end of your prep. In fact, when you get to it, you're going to be pleasantly surprised how much of the underlying concepts you know. Any other thoughts, anyone, before we move on?
What's
All
next?
right, let's cruise. Review. And I know, Ben, you had some important thoughts on reviewing. So why don't you jump in?
Yeah, so I have this mantra that to help you remember, which is review, reflect, redo. And this process is really underrated, especially redos, that people think, oh, well, I've done it. I'm okay on this, and kind of move on. And, there's this motivation to just get through the material, but we really want to be going for mastery. Like people were talking about earlier. It's all about that mastery and the win. The real win is to fully master that material. So what you want to do is this review, reflect, redo process. Is review, like a lot of people do this first step, which is to look at what they missed. Okay, I kind of get it. But then that next step of reflecting is really important to go through these questions of asking yourself, what was the cause of the error? And then how can I prevent it? So that next step of how do I prevent it? You can be really specific with that of oh, you know what? I misread the question. Or misread what it's asking for on quant. Maybe you solve for X, but it was really asking for 3X. And then we think about, okay, how can we prevent that? We could box what it's asking for. We could go back and reread. We could set the variable in the first place. So for each cause, we want to think of solutions and then put those and start implementing those. And then the other thing is to go back and redo. So it's really nice in the course. You have custom tests where you can go back and redo your errors. You can also, we're also going to talk about the analytics, but in the analytics, you can see down to every specific topic on your accuracy and be able to do targeted practice on those topics you're weaker on. So that's really nice as well. So one other thing that's really helpful is flashcarding. So there's a lot of great flashcards in the course, and I often also recommend people creating your own as your notice topics that you're weaker on. You can use a physical card or an app.
The course allows that.
Yeah, the course is right. That's great. Yeah, and so the point of the flashcards is a lot of people have this myth that rereading is gonna be most effective, but really it's the retrieval, the constant quizzing. I prefer with flashcards to do it pretty rapid fire. Really build that fluency. And if you think about how would you learn a language, in all the vocabulary, you'd really need to immerse yourself, build that fluency, both with individual micro steps and then the full big picture, right? So you would be doing vocabulary flashcards and then the full problems, conversation. So you can think of it like that, oh, I'm building fluency. And in terms of redos, I break it down into probably mistakes are most important, but then also I like to mark ones that were guesses or ones that I was really slow on. Because Marty was talking about the importance of the untimed practice, but then if at some point you do want to get that speed, you'll definitely get that by doing more problems. But then it's also good to go back, redo those ones that you were slow on, and it's really nice to see. Oh, last time it was 4 minutes. This time it's only 2 minutes, and then it's another way to see your progress.
Yeah.
One important thing I want to add to all of this, and I love the way that you framed it, the review, reflect, redo. But one thing that I see almost every student making mistakes on, or doing incorrectly in terms of review, is that they will only review their wrong answers and they'll just skip past the ones they got right, assuming, I'm good on those. I only need to look at the ones I got wrong. That is a big, big mistake. If you do a practice set of 10 problems, get 7 of them right and 3 of them wrong, and you only look at those 3, you're missing 70% of the learning that you could do. You want to look at every single one of the ones you got right and say, did I get it right for the right reasons? Maybe you made a mistake and then you made another mistake and just landed on the right answer, right? So confirm that you got it right for the right reasons, and then tell yourself, okay, here's what I would want to do again next time with this type of problem. Ask yourself if there was another way of getting there. On quant problems, there's usually more than one solution path to a lot of the problems. Try it different ways. Try working backwards from the answer. Try picking numbers. Try guessing or estimating. You're not going to be able to build a lot of different muscles until you try all of those different techniques on the same problem, and then ask yourself which one was right for me and what do I want to recognize about the next similar problem. So I bet most of you are probably not doing enough review on your right answers as well as your wrong answers.
Yep.
Super interesting.
Those are great points. And just to piggyback on the idea of flashcards, they're so important because they're easy to learn from and they're easy to use. You know, the misconception that the only time I'm studying for the GMAT is when I'm sitting down at my desk on my computer or at a table is wrong. You can bring them anywhere. You know, for example, the flashcards on the TTP course, you know, you can use on your phone. So yeah, just try to sneak in those study sessions whenever you can, because it's all going to add up, and it's going to make your studying that much more efficient. So so yeah, this is great. These are all great points, everybody. Tracking your errors. Again, I know Ben, you had some thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'll get into that. And just, I love what Jeff said about using all those little breaks in your time. So if you're in line somewhere, definitely all those little bits of time add up a lot. And even spacing it throughout the day, like if you get, you know, all these little sessions of where you're waiting and using that time is fantastic. Yeah. And then for tracking your errors, one other word that I didn't say that's like one of my favorite words is power of habit. And so that was the other thing about that whole review process, is like really figuring out the habits that we need to improve. And so what this error tracker does is it's like, it breaks it down into like, oh, I fell for a trap. My work wasn't organized. And what that's, you know, getting you to reflect, that forcing you to reflect on the process of like, what was the habit that I missed that I need to work on here to prevent this error in the next phase. So having that all tracked, then you can break it down and go back and review those. So that you have the analytics based on the type of error, and then you also have the analytics based on the type of question. So for example, like percents, the course is breaking it down. Percent of, what percent? Percent less than, greater than, percent change, you know, in all these different topics. And then you can go by that, look at your stats on that, you know, drill down into the targeted practice. So you have all these analytics in the course, super helpful to really drill down and know what you need to address, what you're strong and weak on, and be able to improve most efficiently.
Yep, those are good points, Ben. A relevant question that somebody asked actually today, one of our students in one of our live classes asked about how to manage the error log, right? So the fact is that your error log can get big. I mean, there's thousands of questions in TTP, for example. So that's what he was really referring to. So what do you do when you understand a question? Do you keep it in your error log? And you know, you kind of have to use your gut a little bit for this, because if you are 100% set on a question, or maybe there's just a type of question that you got wrong in a particular chapter, you went back, you reviewed, eventually you can remove that from your error log, because you don't want your error log to take a week to get through when you're getting towards the end of your prep, right? So you got to just kind of use your judgment. And there's other ways to look at some of these older questions. Maybe they don't have to be in your error log. Maybe you just bookmark them, or maybe you create flashcards based on an error you made in the question. So you will continue to look at that error log, or excuse me, that concept as you move through your prep. So, and it's different for everybody. So again, you're going to have to kind of use your gut, do what works best for you, and just understand that like the idea of the error log shouldn't be anything foreign to you. I mean, I think a lot of times people will start their GMAT prep and think that this is this new and different thing, but I'm sure in some shape or form you've used an error log before, whether it's in your college classes, other standardized exams. So, you know, ultimately do, you know, what has worked well for you in the past.
Yeah, I was going to add the TTP one is beautifully organized and it's embedded and it makes it really simple, but it doesn't mean you have to use that one. Use whatever one works for your study process. I've seen students that just have like post-it notes all over their walls just saying, don't forget about negatives and data sufficiency and things like that. Whatever process works for you, as long as you're telling yourself what your takeaway was from that problem, and you're recording it somewhere so that you can look for those patterns. Don't be too strict about what format to use. The fact that you reflect is much more important than specifically how.
Yep, exactly. All right, minimizing errors. Marty, I think you enjoy talking about how to minimize these errors. So
Well, definitely. So we're talking about the error log, and
right.
one of the main things you're going to do with that is not just find like what you don't know, but what you do wrong, how you fall into traps, or what type of execution mistakes you make, and these you really want to minimize. And this, once again, going back to the untimed practice, there's your opportunity to do that. And the reason you want to do this is because you don't want to be making careless errors. First of all, these unforced errors, your score might go up literally 100 points just from reducing your careless errors. The other thing is, because of the adaptive algorithm, so if you miss a gettable question, now you're missing a medium question. You might even be missing an easy question, and that drives your score down. So you can't afford to make careless mistakes on the questions you could get. It's one thing to miss a super hard question, and then the algorithm is like, okay, you're still pretty good at this. You miss an easy question, your score is going down. So definitely figure out what causes you to make those careless mistakes and address that through your error log and whatever else, untimed practice. Make sure you minimize the errors you don't need to make. That was the message, yeah.
I've seen students say, well, I can get the really hard ones right. I don't understand why my score is not going up. And as Marty was saying, you're not even going to see those really hard ones if you're missing the easier ones. So it's much more important to make sure that you are not making those kind of simple mistakes than it is to get the conceptually difficult stuff correct. Focus first on what's in my wheelhouse and how do I make sure that I never miss one of those before you move on to the crazy hard stuff.
Absolutely. And a lot of people say, well, should I just work on just hard questions or just medium and hard questions? The funny thing is, easy and medium and hard questions don't always work the same way. Like the hard ones aren't necessarily hard because they're more complex. A lot of time they're just trickier. So that same idea that you're using to get the hard question right isn't necessarily going to apply to medium questions. So you really want to learn how to get all different kinds of questions correct.
Yep, agree. Very good points. Yeah, careless mistakes are killers. So yeah, you just got to really, really work on not making them. It'll happen, but you want to minimize them.
Yeah.
All right, mixed practice. So I told you we talk about mixed practice because that still is important. You can't just do topical practice. After all, mixed sets or mixed problems are what you're going to see on the GMAT. So as you start learning multiple topics, I mean, there's different ways to do mixed practice. Of course, one way is I did 4 chapters. I'm going to do mixed practice just on those chapters. That's something we actually have our students do in the TTP course. We also will do mixed, like smaller quizzes on every single topic, quant or verbal, that they've learned earlier in the course. So it's just another way of review. It's just another touch point where, okay, did I forget an exponent rule? Did I forget how to deal with patterns of units digits? You know what I mean? Things like that, where if you didn't do the mixed practice and you just let everything sit and assumed everything was fine, you wouldn't necessarily see those deficiencies. And then worse off, you wouldn't be prepared to see the questions the way they are presented on the GMAT. I mean, of course, you'll be taking practice exams, but you don't want your first mixed set to be your first practice exam. That could be months and months after you started your prep. So all of this topical learning and topical practice does need to lead into mixed sets. So just set aside some time weekly if you're studying on your own. If you're following the TTP plan, you don't have to worry about it. We do it for you. But yeah, you just need to set aside some time, just like you would with flashcards or error log review, to make sure you're doing a few mixed sets. And then you're basically rinsing and repeating with what you did previously. If you're getting something wrong, you still add it to your error log. You make a flashcard on it. You ask yourself, well, going back to exponents, I did exponents. Why did I forget that I need to factor out when I'm adding bases together? And, really kind of really self-analyze that, because you need to know why things are maybe slipping through the cracks. It could just be because there's a lot of stuff you're learning, but if there's other reasons, you want to figure it out, and then you want to make the proper fixes there.
Yeah, and I'd add one thing to that. It's the 20% of questions you're not getting right that are really indicators of where your weak areas are. I've seen a lot of people say, well, I'm getting 80% of questions correct. And then, in their mixed practice, and then they go to take the test and they're really surprised by it because they didn't score as high as they expected. But the issue is those 20% kind of indicate where your execution issues are, where you need to think more carefully, anything like that. So then you go to take the test and you got these execution issues, you're not thinking carefully enough, or you just plain have a weak area. And somehow the test catches all of that stuff and you score way lower than you expected. So as you're doing your mixed practice, definitely, don't say, oh, I'm doing well enough, or I'm getting most of them correct. Really focus on getting more questions correct and figure out why you're not getting that last 20% of questions correct.
And this goes back to what we were saying about the algorithm. It's not about number of questions right and wrong. This is not like tests that you took in high school and college where you're aiming for 100% accuracy on the test itself. With the algorithm, you're going to be getting lots of questions wrong. It's which ones. And so in a practice set, if you're only missing 20% of questions, but they're the easier ones, then you're really going to be surprised on test day at how low your score is because you're never going to get the hard ones. So, Marty's point is really important. Try not to even focus on how many right and wrong so much as why you got the wrong ones wrong and how do you never make that mistake again.
Yeah.
Yep. Agree with all that. Mixed practice is huge. That is obviously an important conclusion here. And now we enter the practice test phase. Now, the practice test phase is not going to be as long as the learning phase because there's a ton to learn and there's just not that many practice tests. And hopefully, if you've done the learning phase properly, the practice test phase will go quite smoothly. Take all the official GMAT practice exams. If you took the first one early on, you can reset, retake if you want. The database is very large, so you shouldn't see that many repeated questions, and there's probably not that many you'll remember. You can take them every 4 to 7 days. Just be strategic with how you space them out, and be strategic when you take them. If you had a crazy day at work, don't try to come home and jam in a test or jam in a section and then take the next section the next day. It's not going to help. So take it when you're fresh and you have the time. For a lot of people, that's weekends. But then again, if it's weekends, it's, that you're going to have to wait 7 days. And yes, the idea is to take all of them, but, a lot of it depends on your schedule and when your GMAT is scheduled for. Take them seriously, take them time, do everything you're going to do on the test. If you are taking the online GMAT, get the whiteboard and the marker. If you're taking the test center GMAT, get the dry erase notepad and the marker. Take just the breaks that they're offering you, right? And then, of course, after every test, review like heck. These are all going to be really important data points because you've already done the learning phase. If you hadn't, then the data points aren't as important because then you may get a question wrong of a topic you've never seen. But in this case, you can really look at it and say, well, I got a 30, 60, 90 right triangle question wrong because I messed up the ratio. And ask yourself again, why did I mess up the ratio? Have I forgotten it? Was it in the moment? Was it a timing situation? Et cetera, et cetera. So in this data is gold. So yes, take it very seriously, take the time and care to do the analysis that you need. And I think you're going to be in a great spot, presuming you've done everything, we've discussed here up to this point.
Ooh,
Yeah, somebody was asking about the AWA. You could practice for the AWA. It doesn't take that much prep for that. You could do a couple practice essays, learn a template and that kind of stuff at some point later in this practice test phase. Other thing I want to add, look, it says 4 to 7 days. If you need to spend 2 weeks between the tests reviewing because you're like, whoa, I thought I knew, exponents and roots, and it turns out that I learned that way at the beginning and now I've forgotten it. Take 2 weeks, do what you have to do. None of this stuff is rigid. It's really tailored to whatever works for you. Kaylee, you were going to say something?
Oh yeah, sorry. I think this will be the first time any of us has disagreed with each other. I have a minor disagreement with something Jeff said, which is be careful if you're using the whiteboard. I do think it's important to practice with the whiteboard to know what the real thing feels like. But if you're wiping it off between problems, you might not know why you made mistakes you made. So either take pictures of your whiteboard before wiping it off, or use scrap paper for the most part and then do one practice test with the whiteboard. But I do think it's important to capture your scrap paper during that review process. So that's
So maybe,
my
yeah,
personal preference.
the maybe our compromise, Kaylee, is the dry erase notebook, because then you have what, like 10 pages, 8 pages. So technically you could probably keep all your work on that, take the pictures, because it's not, I mean, dry erase notebook, whiteboard. I think the marker is the more important thing to use. You know
Yeah,
what I
that's
mean?
the thing.
So yeah,
Those markers are so annoying because they're not
it's,
on the in-person ones, they're not dry erase, they're wet erase, which is awful. You end up smearing it all over your hands.
yeah,
That's
exactly.
Get
that's
that
my
blue hand
least favorite
going.
part about the GMAT.
Right. So yeah, no, Kaylee's right though, because if you don't know why you got stuff wrong, so yeah, maybe just default to the dry erase pad, so you have plenty of pages, and then you can go back and review your work.
Yeah.
Um.
Oh, couple quick
Oh,
notes on that? We
yeah,
have a sec.
of
Yeah.
course.
So
Yeah,
just wanted to echo what Jeff said about the resting. So yeah, I saw a client, 6:20, like tired, and 7:40, well rested on practice tests. So definitely that's ultra important. One other thing is pre-test routine. So we talked about making everything realistic. I would also, encourage a strong pre-test routine. Like, what's your ideal breakfast? What's the ideal time? I did some research into like ideal activation level. It varies person to person, but I think the average person, it's like 3 hours after waking. So do think about like, what is the ideal time for you? With the online test, it's very flexible on time. It can be a little bit harder in person. But say you do have a 3-hour window, you can look at, what do I want that 3 hours to be ideally, in terms of, a tea, maybe not over too much caffeine, but whatever works for you. A little exercise, a little meditation, the mindfulness and preventing careless errors. So important. And that's probably what's, I'm still shooting for my 800. I think that's still my gap, is on the mindfulness side, like keeping my focus. But some deep breathing exercises I like to do during the warm up, during the instruction screens. So you do have this time, like on the current thing, it's like pretty much an untimed screen for the school choice. So you can really like take all the time you want to take your deep breaths, whatever mantras. So I like to say sharp, focus, precise. I'm sharp, focus, precise, like whatever kind of affirmations you want. Or even sometimes I've had a friend that does like an alter ego. He envisions himself as like an American sniper. I know a lot of celebrities use these kind of alter ego effects, but like getting into that ultra focused state so you're preventing the careless errors is really huge.
And warm up by doing a few practice questions before your test. There's nothing like doing a few practice questions to snap you into GMAT mode and go, whoa, these are way trickier than I remembered even from yesterday. So that can help a lot too.
Yep. All right, and finally, you just schedule your test when you're ready. I mean, you might schedule it months before. If you kind of have your timeline built up, you might wait until you start the practice test phase. Obviously, schedule it when you're ready. Don't just take it to take it. Don't be a serial test taker, because you could run out of your lifetime limits. If you're not hitting your score goal on your practice exams, there's a very slim likelihood that you'll do it on the real thing, because even worse off, there's an added amount of anxiety, stress, nerves, and that might happen test one. Maybe you get that out of the way, and test two, you're fine. But the overall point here is just wait to schedule it and take it to when you feel like you can achieve your score goal. And if it
there's
doesn't
no
go
reason to, if your score goal is 710 and you're scoring 660 on all your practice tests, there's really no reason to schedule a test. I mean, maybe you want to go in there once or twice, I don't know, to get some practice, get used to the test center. But when you start getting to the point where you're like, well, I'm taking my 4th GMAT. Well, why are you taking your 4th GMAT? Just wait until it looks as if you're ready to take the test. Don't use up. You don't want to get in the position they will not budge on the 5 tests per year thing. So you get to your 5th test, I didn't hit my score goal. You got to wait for months to take the test again. You don't want to get in that position.
I think the only caveat I would say to that is, let's say that 740 is what you really want, but you're around a 700 and you're like, I could apply with a 700. It's not where I want to be, but it's a score that I would feel that I was happy that I made progress. Sometimes taking a test to just plant that stake in the ground can take the pressure off. But yeah, don't take it if you're far from your goal. But always plan to take it at least twice. So you don't need to put the pressure on yourself to be perfect before you take it. Tell yourself every single one of you is going to take it more than once. Unless you get an 800 the first time, there's always room to improve. So telling yourself that you're taking it at least twice can take pressure off the first time.
Yep, agree. And that's a good segue into our conclusion here. I know we are about out of time. So these are just some TTP students who have done incredibly well in the GMAT. I'm sure you've seen them on GMAT Club. I'm imagining some of these have had their stories mentioned there.
I think a key thing I want to add is if you watch their stories, you'll see that what they did added up to their score. Like I talked to these guys and, one after the other. Oh, I scored 780. It's not some magical thing that happened. They did all the steps we've been talking about here, doing the untimed practice, doing the topic by topic work, doing the review. All the stuff adds up to that kind of score.
Yep. And just so you guys know, we are running a sale between now and the end of June, and it's summer 20 for 20% off any TTP plan. So if you guys are watching this and you want to check out TTP and take advantage, we definitely welcome you to do it. But hopefully everyone got a lot out of today's webinar. So want to thank Marty, Kaylee, Ben, and it was a blast talking with you guys. If you need anything, you can always reach out to us. If you have further questions, let us know. We're always happy to help, and sure we'll be back soon. So again, thank you everybody for coming. Thank you everybody on the panel. And
hey,
have a
by the way, if you have, I saw a couple questions we didn't get to because they weren't quite in the context. Feel free to hit us by email, and ask us via the Target Test Prep in-course chat. Back to you, Jeff.
All right. Well, just thanking everybody, and everyone have a good, safe week, and we'll talk to everybody soon. So thanks again.
Thanks, everyone, and good luck with your studies.
Thanks.
Take care.
Bye, everybody.
Have fun.